Let's get rolling on a Tuesday. Glasses in session. We go to the Glasser guest line. Check in with Dean Ralsky, who joins us. Give Dean a follow on X at Dean Ralsky, staff writer for the On the Pony Express, covering SMU. And Dean, it's been a historical AP poll that dropped for SMU yesterday. First time they find themselves in the top 25 since 1985. Obviously coming off the college football playoff berth from last season. So how are Rhett Lashlee, SMU, how are they handling expectations going into this season?
Yeah, it's exciting times for SMU. You know, they made, as you mentioned, made the college football playoff last year. And really, they're just trying to pick up where they left off. You know, they kept their entire coaching staff from last season, which has been a key reason why I think this team can really hit the ground running in 2025. And they're going to need to with some of their early tests. But so far in fall camp, you know, they're pushing the team's physicality, make sure they're ready. And, man, they are ready for the start of the season.
They definitely are. I'm sure Kevin Jennings is ready for the start of the season too, Dean, because the last time we saw him, he had a game he wanted to forget against Penn State. And I think that's why SMU is interesting this year, because you and I both know how good Kevin Jennings is, but a majority of people saw him in that Penn State game and probably formed their opinion on what they think. But with him back, and obviously the motivation of how last season ended, what are you expecting out of Jennings this year?
Yeah, you know, he's talked about it a lot this offseason, that the ending of the 2024-2025 seasons allowed him to really have this chip on his shoulder. You know, unfortunately, it was probably a lot of people's first time watching Kevin Jennings against Penn State, but people don't realize that he got them to that game. You know, Rhett Lashlee made the tough decision to move on from Preston Stone and hand over the reins to Kevin Jennings after a Week 3 loss to BYU. And then Jennings went undefeated in the regular season and nearly led an incredible comeback in the ACC championship game against Clemson. So, look, he more than anybody is ready for the start of the season because he's just had that bad taste in his mouth all offseason, and he's ready to get going here in 2025.
So Jennings comes back, Dean, but they lose their top running back, wide receiver. So who are some skill position guys that we could keep an eye out this year? Who do you think will be Jennings' favorite target? Maybe who are some running backs that can help him out as well?
Yeah, so we'll start with the running back position. Obviously, SMU loses Brashard Smith to the Chiefs, who I know you'll talk about later in the show, and what he's doing so far there is a little exciting. But the Mustangs have redshirt freshman Derek McFall, who could very well start Week 1 for the Mustangs. He played in 4 games in the regular season and then played in both postseason games. You know, they thought about burning his redshirt last year because the depth at running back wasn't really there, but they were able to redshirt him, and he's ready to really take a huge step forward today. We actually got to talk to him after practice today. He's put on some big weight. He's talking a lot about how he's able to pick up some of those pass blocks. So he's an explosive speedster running back. And then another running back to take note of would be the UCLA running back transfer TJ Harden, who led the Bruins in rushing yards in 2024. He came to SMU late, arrived in late July, just got here before the start of fall camp, and actually wasn't even cleared to practice until last week. He was still waiting to be officially graduated from UCLA. So we've gotten to see our first few practices from him, and he is a super physical, you know, I think 6'2", 230-pound running back, so a big-time running back that's going to fall downhill. At wide receiver, they bring back Jordan Hudson, who is a senior leader, and they are expecting big things from him in 2025. He looked really great in the spring. You know, he transferred in from TCU a few years ago and has just slowly climbed up the depth chart, and this is his year to really shine. Another wide receiver would be Romello Brinson. He actually snuck in a red shirt. You know, they were planning on him to play last year, but he got banged up and he was just never back to 100%. So they're able to redshirt him last year. And he's someone who's, you know, got a 40-inch vertical. So can just go up and catch those deep balls if you put it in his vicinity. And just the last thing I'd want to add too is SMU thinks they've got one of, if not the best tight end rooms in the country. When you talk about RJ Maryland, who had some preseason hype last year and was really building on a strong season before he had a tough ACL injury in the middle of the year. And then Matthew Hibner emerged in Maryland's absence. And so to have both of those guys back this year can be a real game changer for SMU.
I like it. So the tight end room is going to be really strong. Quarterback, obviously, with Jennings is going to be strong. And then this O-line is going to be really good too, Dean, isn't it?
Yeah, they did lose a couple guys, you know, to graduation to the NFL, but they're excited about this room, and talking with some coaches, they think this offensive line can take a step forward from last year's team. You know, they've got PJ Williams at right tackle, who has a chance to be all ACC first team. I think he'll get all ACC honors for sure, but it's just a loaded tackle position in the ACC, truth be told. They've got a senior leader in Logan Parr at left guard, who's going into his 6th year of college football, getting his 2nd master's degree at SMU. So just a do-it-all guy there, and they're really excited about him. They bring in a couple of transfers, and Addison Nichols from Arkansas played 12 games there, and Josh Bates, who played at Oklahoma. And both of those guys are going to be on the interior. Still waiting to see who's going to play center and who's going to play right guard. In the spring, it looked like maybe Nichols would play center and Bates right guard. It switched in the fall. So, the depth chart is not fully complete for SMU, but they're excited about that room for sure.
On the other side of the ball, Dean, I certainly think the defense is the question mark for SMU. I expect the offense to be terrific, but they lose a lot of starters on the defensive side of the ball, and that's really what has led SMU being so good the past 2 years, is how good they've been on defense while kind of the offense gets all the recognition. How do you think the defense is going to be this season?
Yeah, that defensive line, like you mentioned, just loses a ton of production from last season, but they did bring in a bunch of guys in the portal. They retained Isaiah Smith and Cam Robertson on the edge, a couple of really impressive pass rushers. And so they're expecting big things from those two guys. And then on the interior, you bring in a guy like Jeffrey Embaugh, transfer from Purdue, 6'6", 300 pounds, can just absorb blockers, and is just a pure power type of defensive tackle. And then they brought in Terry Webb from Texas State, who's an interesting prospect. He's got really nice finesse moves on the interior, and has had a couple coaches saying wow during practice. So they're very excited about him. They brought in some depth guys on the edge as well and on the interior, just really trying to reload that group. You think about Wu Spencer from Louisville. You talk about DJ Warner from Kansas, who may not be the biggest guy, but man, he is fast coming off of the edge there. And then Ja'Kai Lang from Missouri as well, someone they're hoping can contribute. Had 3 sacks as a Missouri Tiger last year. So they've got the pieces. For SMU, it's just a matter of coming together, it all coming together on that defensive line.
We're talking with Dean Ralsky here on Send It In, staff writer on the Pony Express. Give Dean a follow on X at Dean Ralsky. Dean, let's dive into the schedule that SMU has, because I think it's an interesting one. They play a lot of the top teams in the ACC this season, and then they also have 2 difficult non-conference games against teams from the state of Texas as well. What were kind of your overall takeaways of the SMU schedule?
It's an exciting one for sure. For a lot of people last year maybe said, well, SMU had this super favorable run, and then they saw the Penn State game, and SMU didn't get to prove a lot of people wrong. So even though SMU knows they had a successful season in 2024, they're still hungry, right? They've got, as you mentioned, these 2 key out-of-conference games against Baylor and TCU, which are not only big just for this season, but man, for bragging rights and recruiting and just that area of Texas, some huge games right off the gate. And then you've got Clemson, Miami, and Louisville all on the schedule in ACC play. You'll have the ACC championship rematch in Death Valley in October. SMU would like to think they're undefeated going into that game, and that could be a big-time matchup in the ACC. And then they'll come home a couple weeks later against Miami for homecoming. That'll be a fun one. Carson Beck, of course, coming to town. Miami, high hopes. And then Louisville, a team that a lot of ACC people think could make their way to Charlotte if a few things go their way. They've got, of course, that running back room of Isaac Brown and Duke Watson, a very exciting room there. And then you bring in Miller Moss at quarterback. So, you mentioned that the defense has some question marks. Well, we're going to find answers to those really quickly when you think about the quarterbacks SMU's facing and Sawyer Robertson and Josh Hoover, Cade Klubnik, Carson Beck and Miller Moss to finish it off. So some real tests for SMU this year.
You mentioned, Dean, right now people that are watching on YouTube and Twitch, they can see that Clemson is the favorite, followed by Miami and then Louisville. So SMU going to play all 3 of the teams. What do you think is the pecking order in the ACC? Clemson's the best team. Do you think SMU's 2? Are they 3? How do you see them amongst some of the ACC's best?
In my preseason poll that I submitted at ACC Media Days, I did have SMU second. Of course, Clemson's number 1. You can't argue against that with all they bring back. With Miami, they look super strong in the trenches, right? On offense and on the defensive line as well. But you lose your top 6 pass catchers from last year, and you bring in a new quarterback, and you lose Damian Martinez at running back. Now they've got Mark Fletcher there, who they think is capable, but that's a lot of question marks as well. I'm not one of those who's worried that Carson Beck's health is necessarily an issue, but when you when your top receiver from last year was your seventh best pass catcher, that's going to cause some concerns. And then the defense. Look, they've got the talent. You bring in Corey Heatherman as the defensive coordinator. How quickly can he turn that group around? I still think we have to wait and see. And then Louisville, I've just got questions on defense. I think the offense can be terrific and high scoring, but when you think about some of the games Louisville got into last year, that game against Miami, they got up into the 40s, if not the 50s, but they just couldn't stop Miami. And Georgia Tech is a sleeper as well, and I think they could be right up there as well. So it is an open race for that sort of second spot. There are a bunch of teams you talk about, maybe even Duke getting into the mix, and what does Florida State look like? So it's an open race in the ACC.
Dean, we got about 20 seconds. The win total for SMU at BetMGM is 8.5. Would you go over or under for SMU wins this season?
I would go over. I think it's key that you get Baylor, Miami, and Louisville at home. If you want to pencil in a loss to Clemson, that's fine. But other than that, you're talking about Baylor, TCU, Miami, Louisville. You just need to go 2-2 in those games to hit the over. I like SMU's odds.
Great stuff. Dean Ralsky, give him a follow on X at Dean Ralsky, staff writer for On the Pony Express, joining us here on Send It In. Dean, appreciate the time, man. Enjoy the season. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.